Hello, greetings from frigid, not as bad as it was a few days ago, but still cold St. Louis. I'm Andre Ivanov here with the inaugural edition of our monthly Going Deeper. Some would call it What's in Your Box. This is a opportunity for us to really discuss in more detail the wines that are going to be included in your month's wine club. I am here joined by two of my closest and my oldest friends. Here we have Allison Gorsuch, longtime St. Louis sommelier, also former beverage director of the Beverly Hills Hotel in Beverly Hills, as well as Farmhouse Inn, as well as countless of other amazing places, and former assistant editor of the Somm Journal. She's going to be helping us with some writing for your newsletter every single month. And then here we have the one and only Michael Hill Kennedy II, otherwise known as MK2. Yes, you did. And he is the president and owner of Ben Fresh, an amazing company that stretches the entire globe, focusing on really, really great wines based in Napa, but he is also an STL kid, and we thought there would be no better way to start off this new iteration of now Bliss Wine Concierge than having the three of us sit here and talk to you about your first month's wine selection. So,
perfect. Andre, how much does everybody in the wine club know about you?
I am fairly familiar to a lot of people, but if anybody doesn't know me, I am the president and CEO, newly minted, of Bliss Wine Concierge, and I've been involved with Bliss since 2015, and I am a St. Louis native. I started my career here at got tons of places. Been to Set, at Brasserie by Niche. I was the opening beverage director and general manager here at Elia, this beautiful space that has just celebrated its 10th anniversary, and that's why we're here, kind of bringing it all home once again. I then moved to San Francisco, where I was the wine director at Lazy Bear until earlier this year, and now I own Bliss and part of Bliss Mexico. That's about it.
Yeah.
Oh, and I passed one of these things. September.
He happens to be a master sommelier, just FYI.
September of 2018, and again December of 2018. For anybody would like to know why, Google Master Sommelier Exam 2018. All right. So I've asked Allison to lead the discussion here.
I'm bringing out my legal pad.
Sweet.
So thank you for the history there, but I know you, Aaliyah have been friends for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
When did the transition, thank you, for you to actually take over Bliss? How did that come about?
I helped Aaliyah start out, and I was the first person to drag her into this unfortunate role of distribution back in 2015. We actually visited the same winery 2 weeks apart, 2014, a wine that you'll be seeing later this year, Joao Tavares. And we've been fast friends ever since. Earlier this year, in March or so, she approached me with the idea of purchasing Bliss, as she moves on to focus on being a mom, a wonderful life coach with their motivational series and business. And I said, yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic.
That's
Well,
about
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I know you guys have shared a philosophy on the wines that you purchased, and what you were seeking for importing and selling. Can you expand a little bit on that? I'm sure your wine club members are already pretty familiar, but never hurts to.
A couple of things. First of all, we think that, I have this really lame saying, I'm sure if you've ever seen me on the floor, you've heard it. Without proper context, it is just rotten grape juice. And so we strive to give you that context by traveling the world near and far to meet winemakers, amazing winemakers, either well-established or up-and-coming, such as Mr. Kennedy here. And we really do try to not just befriend them, but really get inside of their operation, understand how and why they make the wines that they make, offer wines that are not readily accessible or that are not overrepresented in our market, and try to take you to places that are cool, both historically and for the wines that they produce. We all know that there are parts of the world that we've all heard about for wine, but there's also a lot of parts of the world that, especially nowadays, are up and coming, whether that's due to demand, climate, yeah, brought to you by climate change,
Curiosity.
Yeah.
Definitely.
tourism, and for all these reasons, we decided to focus the wine list, the wine club, not just on the places and the people, but also give you the opportunity to go there with us. And so we'll be visiting all these places as time goes on.
Together. MK2.
Okay, too.
Shifting.
Will you tell us a little bit about how you got into wine and your background?
Well, I met this amazing sommelier straight out of college. No, my first wine job ever was with you back 2009.
Yeah.
2009, right?
Yeah.
So 13 years ago.
That is crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. Working at a winery here in Missouri, which was a great way for me, to learn and experience and have that kind of like client interaction, which was really pretty foundational because although I'd studied wine and I loved wine, it wasn't until people came in and started like asking me questions.
Right.
I specifically remember someone came in and they were like, "Oh, I love Côte d'Aron. What should I drink here?" And I was like, "Allison, what should they drink?" You're like, "Syrah, dummy."
To give this some context, Michael was 22
Yeah.
and had just graduated from Purdue and was just like passing time until he figured out what he wanted his real first job to be. And I had just moved back to St. Louis for a hot minute, and so we just kind of connected. It was a tasting bar
Yeah.
in,
It was cool.
in Missouri.
Yeah. But like they had wines from all over.
Yeah.
And so that was something that was really interesting because even though there were a couple of Missouri wines, we got to like kind of dip our toes into what's an Oregon Pinot, what's a Sonoma Syrah, like on, and it was a really good. Like pouring that 400 times on a Saturday, you kind of like get to know how people interact with wine and the questions they ask, and then it sparked a ton of questions that I berate you with later in the day, and then study in my books, and and then I studied and passed the certified, I think shortly after that.
Oh yeah, we were there.
Yeah.
Well, everybody else was scratching their head about what to offer. Here comes Michael saying, "Oh yeah, you should really have the Chateau tour with your dinner." And Doug Frost is looking up and saying, "Huh? Well, what should I have for dessert?" He's like, "Well, if you're already having the tour, why not decaf?"
Yeah.
We just looked at each
To
other
be
like,
fair, it's the only Bordeaux I knew at the time, so.
It's like, I think this kid's gonna be just fine. Oh yeah. Then shortly thereafter, I was there when you got the phone call to get your first sommelier job, running the I believe it was the Ritz in DC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Followed by the Canaan.
Canaan Ritz.
Yeah. So a little
They were good.
wine pedigree for you.
Those were cool jobs though because all I ever had in my wine experience was a Missouri winery.
Mhm.
So going to DC, all these textbooks that we'd be reading and studying. By the way, an incredible tasting group that Andre led is really the reason I even know how to taste wine today. So these two have been wildly foundational for me.
I failed 5 times.
But yeah, and then when I went to DC, all the stuff I've been studying, I was actually seeing.
Right.
And that was really cool because not buying, I couldn't afford to buy anything, but I could, when a guest sees you pouring a really amazing wine you're excited about, almost always, unless they're just completely oblivious or
Right.
whatever, they almost always offer you something to taste. So I really did in that 2.5 years I was in DC, I got to taste through, I think like a really solid foundation of what the classical wine world had to offer.
Right.
A little touch into things that were esoteric, but really like that hotel, that experience was very classical, like Old Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, the classics from Napa,
Sure.
whatever. Germany a touch. But then when I took the job in Grand Cayman, I started working for Eric Repair, who has 2 restaurants. He has one in the Ritz Cayman, which is Blueberry Repair,
Right.
and then he has Liberta down in New York.
Which is still number 1 on my list.
It's actually number 1 on a lot of
Many
lists.
people.
Yeah. 2 years in a row, best restaurant in the world. But But what was great about that restaurant was in DC, I was like walking around the tables and I would say, you know, oh, I've heard this is a good wine. You know, I've heard it's a good vintage.
Right.
Whatever. But when I started working for Chef Repair, he made it very clear to me very early that so much more was expected of me.
Okay.
So like I had to know the people that made it, the reason it was made, the history, the context, like you were saying. And you're so right. Like if we just look at wine from a consumer standpoint, in that some way early on, I really did look at it that way. You miss like 90% of what makes wine really special.
Yeah.
You know.
Just really the romance.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
I mean,
Like you want to know.
everybody can say, you know, objectively whether or not that's a good wine, but
Yeah.
when you give the story behind it, who makes it, the vineyards, the viticulturalist, all of the things that come together, the importer,
Yeah.
you know, who's distributing it, somehow or another the story becomes much more special. And I think that's what Bliss is really about.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we try to do is we try to look for a story to tell, and also why it's going to translate well to the place where most stories are told, at a bar or around a dinner table, around a table in general. And so one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to ask Michael to be the first person is he's got such a great story, as you've heard, but you've only heard half of it, you know? So how did we get here, you know? And talk to us a little bit about briefly Ben Fresh. And then,
no, that's it. Yeah, I mean, in the pursuit of learning more, I had to go to places and meet the people who made it. And in 14 or something, I was in Napa, which was admittedly a region I really didn't love too much at the time. But we sold a lot of it, so like I had to spend
Because you
some
were being
time
a
there.
snobby son.
I was being a terrible snob. And I met this guy. He started working at a winery called Bryant Family, which is a winery a lot of St. Louisans know. It's owned by a
another St. Louis person.
But obviously a great one of the Grand Cru from Napa. And I met this young guy who was I think 28 at the time, and a ponytail and a beard. And he greeted me with a beer he made at the winery, and we walked the vineyard for like 3 hours drinking beer. He had just moved over from Screaming Eagle, and he was just so not what I expected at all from this kind of winemaker. I was expecting like buttoned up, like French Bordeaux, like you know that kind of like dressed how we're dressed right now, and he was I think in a t-shirt and cargo shorts. So, and yeah, I fell in love with what he was talking about. Like you know, he was telling me about micro terroir within the vineyard and the reasons why certain things are planted, and on and on. Long story short, that guy was Mark Gagnon. He's now my partner and director of winemaking for everything that we do in our portfolio. And he's just incredibly inspired. You know, when he took over Bryant, it had already had a pretty long, like, storied past. But I mean, in the first vintage he released, Galoni said that the wines were the most, quote, utterly brilliant from the estate that he'd ever seen. And he just kind of dialed in more and more. And he credits that to his time at Screaming Eagle. An example is 14 micro terroir on Eagle, and so instead of like painting with the color red, they paint with like 14 shades of the color red. So it's just so much depth in that character. It's a long story, but in that moment when I met Mark, he poured me a glass of red wine, and he didn't tell me what it was, and I put my nose in it, and it was like exotic and wild and spiced and floral, and then texturally it was like gravel in a glass of water. Like it was thick in between the thin, and I didn't know what it was, but it was Petit Verdot. And Petit Verdot ended up being a wine that was pretty foundational for me because we started Component Wine Company through that. So our first winery was based on that tasting experience.
And Component, just so you all know, was really intriguing because Bordeaux, as we all know, is usually a blend of at least 3, if not 4, if not 5 grapes. Yeah. And Component was one of the first wineries to make varietal wines from different vineyards in Bordeaux. But let's fast forward to Somme.
Yeah, so Somme we started with the 2017 vintage. And Somme was really cool because Component was hyper-focused.
Right.
Somme was a way for us to make wine with really cool people and like collaborate. There's so much you can learn from people's varied backgrounds. Like all 3 of us, although we cross paths, like our backgrounds are so different.
Right.
And so Som, as a team, we make the wine. So we make every decision based on team meetings, and that's stressful and complicated. But what it leads to is these really thoughtful, complicated wines that do kind of like buck the system a little.
Right. How big is your team?
So we have, on the back, I think there's 24 signatures of the winemakers.
Right.
But the core team that really makes the decisions is like 9 people.
Okay.
So it's a lot of fun.
So let's jump in.
Yeah.
The first wine is fascinating to me because as a student of just nerdy history, this one just blew my mind and what it actually was. So way back in the early 1980s, the AVA system was just coming up in the wine regions, as we call it, the legal definition in the U.S. And for anybody that doesn't know, the very first wine region in the United States was here. It's Augusta. It's about 25 miles yonder. Number 2 was Napa Valley. So we beat them by 2 months. Somebody knew how to file paperwork properly. And then number 3 was, of all places, Yakima Valley, Washington. Chateau Saint Michel is an amazing winery. They have been doing a great representation of the possibilities of what Washington State can do in the wine world for many, many decades now. And back in the 1980s, they came out with a wine that really redefined what Americans thought of as the possibility of Riesling. And that wine was called Eroica. And it came from a single vineyard, essentially, the Zilla Ranch Vineyard in Yakima. Those vines were planted, I believe, in 1983.
I think late 70s.
Late 70s. So, as time goes on, vines produce less and less fruit. So, commercially speaking, that's not a good thing. Quality speaking, it's a great thing because the same amount of nutrients and effort goes into making a smaller number of berries, thus concentrating the flavor. So if you notice on this bottle in front of you, it says Zilla Ranch Vineyard. Mike, where in the Zilla Ranch Vineyard does it come from?
Love that question.
Oh, you can't say. So Michael cannot say where these come from, but let's just say these are very close to the original vines that made Eroica, and let's just say that a certain winery decided to sell off the rights to this particular part of the vineyard because the vines were getting a little old and not producing as much. And our good friend Mr. Kennedy swooped in with the opportunity and created what I think is one of the fundamentally most delicious bottles of Riesling that I've tasted from the United States. Mike, tell us about it. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, Zilla Ranch is really special, really historic. It's raised riverbed, so the stone, it almost looks like Chateauneuf-du-Pape, these galets or these round, big river stones. So Washington, as you know, in the summer it can get really hot, but at night it gets really cool. So you can get a lot of ripeness out of Washington though, because those stones not only radiate heat throughout the day when it gets cooler, so it can help the progression of the vine, it doesn't shut down at night. But it also allows for moisture to be caught under those, and so even though a drought period can happen, all that moisture, which would normally evaporate, it hits the rock and stays. So it's a really special little piece of land. In fact, the labels are all the topographical drawings of each vineyard, which is really cool.
Oh, awesome!
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't
nice.
know that. And then in terms of just sheer nerdiness, this comes off as a little bit off dry, but there's quite a bit of sugar in here. It's 12 grams per liter.
Is that high?
No, I think it's I think it's 8 grams.
8 grams.
It's a good amount of sugar.
Yeah.
MS.
But the cool thing about it is when we, actually on the 20, I think it's 1.2, which is 12 grams. I think you're right. You are right. Yeah.
I remember my tech sheets.
Don't ever question on gram stuff. He has this encyclopedic memory, which is frustrating and lovable at the same time. But no, it's really classically made. So we do a standard free run pressing of the fruit. We remove it. We then use the Lees wine for other things, but really fresh, clean stainless steel fermentation. We arrest the fermentation through temperature, which is a way to keep the alcohol down and maintain a little bit of that fresh fruit sugar. and we keep the acidity really high, so that even though there is sugar, it doesn't feel so much that way because it's really racy, fresh, like mouth-watering acidity.
And I mean, and immediately, my idea goes. And if anybody's ever heard me give food and wine pairing, I get a little precious on some things, but then I get back to my Missouri roots real quick. So like obviously it's a great opportunity to eat with things like Thai food, with elevated elevated East Asian things that are a little bit on the lighter side that might have a little bit of spice. Also, a really perfect component to something that has both like a tropical fruit note and a spice, something that you're thinking like things like coastal Mexican cuisine. And the idea here is that it's a wine that has a little bit of sweetness to it, so you can balance out spice. But it has, like what Mike said, it has a really, really beautiful amount of freshness and liveliness, so it can really brighten up a heavier dish. And one of my favorite things to eat with this is orange chicken from Panda Express.
That's where we're going.
Yeah, you'll always get a fast food recommendation from me, or something else of the sort. But that's what I said, is that it's not meant to break the bank, but it's something that's delicious and amazing, and I think right up anyone's alley that's willing to give this style of wine a little bit of a chance. So.
It's an entry into a little bit of sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not sweet, but it's
pleasant.
Well, and it's a perfect example of what you're trying to do with these wines and with the stories.
Yeah.
All right.
So moving on to the second one.
Sure.
Michael,
so this is
tell us about it.
2019 Chardonnay that we make with some from the LS Vineyard, which stands for Larry Stone. Larry's like an OG master sommelier, maybe like the OG master sommelier up there with like other people whose names we don't mention anymore.
I believe he passed in 1986, which is quite a while ago.
The year before I was born.
Yeah, I believe he's the only person that the court will ever admit to getting every single question on the theory exam correct.
Really?
He's incredible. I mean, he also
and a super nice guy.
Yeah, he's an incredible guy. His knowledge is so deep. I mean, I heard actually the night that we kind of drunkenly conceived Som, he and Raj Par were getting into an argument over the scandals of Austrian Gruner Veltliner. And it was
Austrian antifreeze scandal.
I mean, I have nothing to contribute to that conversation. I'm just sitting here laughing at it.
Again, that was pre your birth.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for that. We're gonna have a whole Austrian month. Don't worry.
But Larry's an icon, and his partner in his winery is called Lingua Franca, which is in the Eola Amity Hills of the Willamette Valley. For your reference, it's right outside of Salem, and it's the coldest subregion of the Willamette Valley. What that really means is that you're going to have a little bit higher acid profile from those wines, and they tend to be a little bit more old world in style, as opposed to like the riper Dundee or McMinnville wines that are really popular. Icons in their own right. But Larry bought the vineyard right next to the extremely iconic Evening Land Seven Springs vineyard. So these are vine to vine. Larry used to run Evening Land and saw this amazing vineyard. And anyway, the Chardonnay and Pinot that you have in this are both from the same vineyard. But what I think is really special, Thomas Saab, who's the winemaker on this, he used to work at Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, Domaine Dujac. He just has this incredibly light touch for Chardonnay and Pinot. But I think this Chardonnay in particular is really strange because we kind of married the two current styles of Burgundy. So white wine from Burgundy is Chardonnay. This, if you zoom in on Burgundy though, there's really two polar styles. There's this really soft, round, like Loire style, which is like a little bit oily in texture and fat. Still piercing acidity and absolutely fresh, but definitely more like your classical style Chardonnay. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have this new crew that's really influenced the winemaking in Burgundy. People like Pierre-Yves Colin-Mouret, Jean-Marc Rouleau, who make wine in a really reductive way. So they press the fruit, they keep it away from oxygen, they sulfur it, and they get tannin extraction, and it makes this really grippy mouthfeel texture with an angular style to the wine. So what we did was we made 50-50 roughly in this really soft pneumatic press soft style blended with this grippy, angular style, and it's this teeter-totter between these two opposing things, and it ends up being an extremely like energetic, texturally interesting wine.
I think so. Because, like a lot of times when we talk about Chardonnay, it almost has to come, we tend to simplify things because wine is complicated and it can become really, it can go over people's head really easily.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to just sit there and say, big, bold, oaky, buttery Chardonnay, this is your, this camp, and your really lean, crisp, mineral-driven, Chablis. And when you're right, this is kind of right between the middle. It's got the best of all worlds.
And it's still salivating.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, brace yourself for the acidity for sure. But it also has this like salty
Richness, yeah.
Yeah. So it has this like savory piece, which is nice.
And so a lot of times when people talk about white wine going well with food, and especially with seafood, I think that that's just like calling all seafood seafood. That's just not right.
I love that.
And so I think we're here squarely in the whitefish camp, but also it can, depending on what it's served with, this can play well with the oiliness of salmon. It can play with the richness of something like sturgeon or even something like halibut. But I think that with this particular style of Chardonnay, it also lends itself to a lot of the simpler things that you can whip up at home.
Yeah.
Because not everybody has time to do a 3-hour sauce or to poach something and then overnight and things of that nature, things that we do at fancy restaurants. But if you're throwing together something simple like some veggies that you've steamed, or just adding a little bit of salt and just doing some pan-seared something easy on the stovetop, this is absolutely perfect because it doesn't go too intense in one or the other direction. And that little bit of salinity that Mike talked
I was
about.
gonna say lemon and salt.
Yeah,
Anything
it's just-
with lemon and salt.
You're fine, yeah. It's like you're looking always for a bridge when you're doing food and wine pairings, but that bridge never has to be a 4-lane highway. That just actually kind of makes it a little bit more boring. And so this is just that subtle kind of bind tie that binds, which is something I actually kind of find very similar to the Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir has so many different dimensions and so many different possibilities. But here, Mike, I think you've been able to capture something that is both elegant and also powerful, and a very interesting kind of a juxtaposition. So, what'd you do?
Well, I can't take credit for
All
it,
24.
but yeah, all of us. On the back you can see there are
we are-
actually
we-
signatures
yeah.
of everyone.
And to be fair, we are here in the northern reaches of the Republic of Y'all, so let us y'all.
I love it. What's really special about this wine is, we did so much to the Chardonnay. We made so many decisions, but as a team, we were cohesively on the same page, like perfectly, that we just wanted to make a really classical Pinot Noir. From Thomas' time at DRC and Dujac, they're used to 100% whole cluster. In the New World, if we did that, the wines would be so abrasive, so like aggressively grippy. So we did 25%, and then the rest of it is just really classical Pinot. So concrete fermentation, 9 months in oak, bottled before the next harvest. So I hesitate to use the word simple because it's extremely complex. But the winemaking on this was really simple, classical Pinot Noir.
Cool.
Obviously, in some cases, especially with wine, the less you do, the more complex the wine is. And I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah.
It is textural, it has fruit, it is a little powerful, but it's also really subtle and simple.
Yeah, for sure. And this is one of those opportunities to sneak in a red wine with, again, seafood. But also, seafood can be denser. You think of places in the world that the traditional pairing for octopus is red wine. Makes sense, right? This doesn't have a ton of that grippy tannic quality, but it almost does ask for something that has a little bit more density. So octopus, so like really rich preparations of salmon, especially things that have cherries and beets included into it, and it does have a smokiness to it, and it's not overbearing. And I think that if we're also like looking for something a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Less, like, what's the word I'm looking for? A really big Pinot.
Can we say names? Or
Blatant.
Slutty.
What did he say? Yeah. This is that very
Forward.
Yeah. This is confident yet elegant. How about that?
No, I agree.
I liked your thing about juxtaposition because it's elegant and rustic at the same time.
Yeah. Finally.
Yeah, moving on.
Oh.
So this is a really special wine. Actually, this is the first time this wine has ever been offered outside of the place that it's named for. This is called the Cheese Shed from Somme. This is a drawing by an amazing artist named Darcy Edwin. And do you want me to hold it up?
Yeah.
Yes,
It's actually a really cute story. I mean, we have our tasting room in Napa is in an 1870s cheese barn that was owned by the Kreutzer family originally. It's in Coonsville, which is a really kind of rustic part of Napa, not overblown like 29 and all these other fancy places. And it mirrors exactly who we are. It's rustic, it's historic, it's really special to us. And the cheese shed sits on a 26-acre property of vines. And this is actually a field blend of everything on the property. So because it is Napa, it's primarily Cabernet Sauvignon, but it has Tannat, it has Cab Franc, it has these really cool varieties that are planted on the property, Carmenere, Merlot, and it's kind of become like our little secret wine that you can only taste and have at the cheese shed in Napa. So we wanted it to be, we actually wanted it to be forward, and we wanted it to be like really generous and really drinkable. If you're a really serious wine lover, you're gonna love it because it has like structure and acid and complexity. But if you love like, you know, $20 pizza wine, you're also gonna love it. There's a lot to love in it in that sense.
And it's actually, that's really special because Bordeaux, typically, as we kind of started the conversation with, really only usually uses 3 or 4 grapes. So to have Carmenere and Tannat, and is there Malbec as well?
Mm-hmm.
So,
We're serious. Why would we
so to have all the Bordeaux varieties together is really something that only the New World can pull off at this point, and I don't even know anybody else that's doing that. So.
Yeah, now it's not especially.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks. I wanted to take this back because this is like one of those quintessential wines that I think it's you know, I hate to call it egalitarian, but it's almost in that same vein that you can have the most like, you know, complex and most expensive, most beautiful dry aged piece of beef with it, but here in St. Louis. And not to anybody that's from here, it's ever been a Lion's Choice.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. Yeah, it's everybody's guilty pleasure.
What is your favorite?
Of course it's not. I've already been to Lion's Choice. How do you know? I can't be here more than 24 hours without going there. If anybody doesn't know, it's the greatest roast beef sandwich that comes through a drive-through in the entire country. And sometimes, you know, like things that are intense for our friends up in Chicago that love their Italian beef sandwiches. All these things are designed to be an intense flavor profile for the food, especially when you dip something into like jus or something.
I was going to say, with the Italian beef, there's enough fruit here, to your point, that it would kind of come with spice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something to wash down all that cheese on the cheesesteak if you're all the way out on the East Coast. So this is something that you know, is delicious on its own, but also just, you know, you can have it with almost anything. Just please don't eat it with sushi.
Maybe barbecue eels.
Yeah, actually, come to think of it, our friend Jamin would probably say otherwise. So you know, that is a really great representation of Somme. I know we're getting to the point of most people's attention span going into the bottles instead of us. So we're gonna sign off. Any parting last words?
I just hope you guys love the wine. I mean, we make wine so that we can share it, and we make wine so that it can be a pleasure to other people, and so it's really awesome to have the opportunity to do that, and I hope you love them as much as I love these two.
Any thoughts on the wine?
This has been wonderful and so great to kind of launch into this with you two. Just to let you know that I'll be starting with Andre's supervision, of course, the newsletter monthly. So everything that we just talked about, I'll sort of recap so that you don't have to study while you're doing this, and you can just enjoy the wines. And we'll give you a little bit more information, and then you can email email us and ask any questions, and we'll answer them.
Yeah, and these videos will all be pinned to our website. That is coming, I promise. It's just the last couple of little small minor adjustments away. The first shipment of the Bliss Wine Concierge should be going out in January, and then subsequently 1 month later you're going to get to something completely different. Stay tuned for wines from a private label that I did with my good friend Johannes Zillinger from Austria in next month's edition. And for anybody that is wondering, Bliss Wine Club, Bliss Wine Concierge is something that not only gets you the opportunity to have these wines, but also gives you the opportunity to go and explore them in close proximity. And so if you would like to come out to Napa and visit the tasting room at State of Mind, if you're a member, it makes it so much easier. And thank you so much for your time. Cheers, and here's to a great 2023.
Cheers.